Hi, my name's Samuel Findlay, and you're listening to the ACES podcast. I'm a Communications and Media Officer at the ARC Centre of Excellence for Electromaterials Science, and your host. In this podcast, you'll hear from researchers who are making a difference through their work. From those in academia to those in industry, we'll hear how they got to where they are today, and we'll walk with them as they reflect on their respective journeys. We'll also find out what helps them approach and tackle their work each day, and how they enjoy their downtime too. In today's episode, I chat with Dr. Leo Stevens. Leo is the founder of Eon Labs and the co-founder of Upwood Manufacturing. He is a scientist and entrepreneur who was born and raised on the coast of Australia in Wollongong. He completed both his undergraduate degree and PhD at UOW. In his spare time, he likes to jump in the ocean, walk his dog, and be out in nature. What's more, he even has his very own podcast called Lab Notes. So, without further ado, let's get to the podcast and my chat with Leo. So I'm here today talking to Dr. Leo Stevens. Thanks for jumping on the podcast.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So let's start with your PhD experience, which you did at the University of Wollongong. How was that and what did you do?
Yeah, so I would have started around 2012 and took around 5 years to complete, ending in 2017. Was doing my PhD out at the Innovation Campus, but I was pretty familiar with the University of Wollongong. I'd done my undergraduate there as well. So I started off with a Bachelor of Science with a chemistry major, and then kind of transitioned slowly more into the bioscience space through the PhD, where we were studying nerve regeneration. I was part of Gordon Wallace's Australian Laureate Fellowship team and working on biomaterials like hydrogels and electrically stimulating neural cells with graphenes and conductive polymers.
Great. And you mentioned Gordon Wallace there. Who were your other supervisors?
Yep, so I had three supervisors. Gordon was the primary supervisor, and then Kerry Gilmore, who provided a lot of the biology and cell stimulation support, and then Mark Inhet-Penhus, who had actually been my honours supervisor. He was more in the material science space, and I still deal with him quite frequently.
Great, and all of which are still at the University of Wollongong, who I see passing in the corridors quite often.
Yeah, definitely. I think they've all established themselves with pretty comfortable careers there, and I don't foresee any of them moving now.
No, definitely not. So, are you from Wollongong originally as well?
Yeah, pretty close. I grew up in Stanwell Park, which is about half an hour to the north. Beautiful spot right on the beach. I spent a lot of time in the ocean and on South Coast camping trips as a kid. So yeah, I'm from the Illawarra for sure, but have done a lot of travel. My partner's actually, or my wife I should say, is American, so we've been there quite a number of times, and I've also had the privilege of going to Europe and a few places through Southeast Asia. So very much like seeing the world, despite having lived in this region my whole life.
So I believe you're also involved in surf lifesaving?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually the president of my local surf lifesaving club now. I've been a member of that club for probably 20 years or so, starting from nippers.
Oh, great.
And slowly worked my way up the ranks through being a patrolling member, a patrol captain. I'm now part of the emergency call-out team, so part of the jet ski rescue squads and that kind of stuff. There's an after-hours emergency, we get called out to that. But a lot of my time there is actually spent on the bureaucratic side through the presidency, dealing with Surf Lifesaving Illawarra, Surf Lifesaving New South Wales, and just the membership of our club in general.
Great. So you still jump in the ocean quite often?
Yeah, of course. Every time I'm down there, I try to get in the ocean, and we'll go many times that I'm not on patrol as well. We walk our dog on the beach, and I'll always go for a swim and a surf when I can during that.
Great. So just going back to your studies, how did you find the transition from your undergrad to a PhD?
I guess in some ways it was quite smooth because I had done my undergrad at the University of Wollongong. I knew quite a lot of the people. My honours supervisor, Mark, became one of my PhD supervisors, and I had worked not with Gordon directly, but certainly in and around the group in various formats. I had done a summer scholarship at IPRI probably in 2010 or 11 under Simon Moulton. So I was certainly familiar with the systems and the places in that respect. It was a bit of a tumultuous time for me personally with that transition. So I had actually taken off 18 months between my undergrad and my PhD, and I spent some time overseas. I actually met my current wife while working at a summer camp in the US. and then was looking after some unwell family members around that time. So I guess finding my feet again into the academic world was impacted by that more than by the standard transition to the university space. But yeah, was quite familiar with the people and the processes and the research system, so that wasn't a problem at all.
Sure, and I also understand that you did a grad cert in entrepreneurship and innovation. How'd you find that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the real nice things about having done my PhD within ACES was that it did open my eyes to both the challenges and opportunities of research commercialization. The grad cert was a bit later on. I actually started off with something called the Transition Project under Chris Gilby, who was the entrepreneur in residence within ACES. So he took us out to interview CEOs and venture capitalists and entrepreneurs and kind of get a sense of that science translation ecosystem. And that really piqued my interest in that space. So I then signed myself up for the graduate certificate program with the Sydney Business School, where we did some kind of formal courses in education around science, innovation, entrepreneurship, and those things. And then I also was part of the Innovation Works prototyping competition that was run under the Global Challenges program, where myself and another PhD student, Nick Roach, we built a drone prototype, which kind of ties into my surf-life saving expertise, because we were making a drone prototype to deliver rescue equipment out into swimmers in distress. That was kind of a nice way to tie in those two interests of science commercialization and surf-life saving.
You know, a lot of people seem to, that have done a PhD similar to yourself, stay on with the university working as, research fellows and whatnot. But you sort of went outside academia, more so into industry. How was that decision? And was that something you always wanted to do, or just an opportunity presented itself that was too good to say no to?
I mean, if you had asked me when I was going into my PhD what my career would look like, I certainly would have felt like I would stay on the academic path. My mum was an academic at Sydney University, and my dad worked for the CSIRO, so the apple didn't fall too far from the tree.
Yeah, definitely.
But in terms of why I've chosen to spend a bit more time in industry and engage this direction, it's partially just because of the funding constraints on early career research slots. I think there is far more PhD students coming into the system than there are grants available for the early career researchers. So there's a constraint there, and a lot of PhDs by necessity have to find alternative outlets to their graduation. So that, to me, the writing was on the wall that it was going to be quite a challenging career path and a highly competitive career path to try to fight for these limited grant spots. So I was looking around for different ways to apply what really was my interest in the process of science and innovation in a different way, and finding funding from different sources. So to me, the science commercialization process is a way to tap into that, where you can find commercial revenue streams and investor funding as a way to support the process of research and development. But I also didn't come kind of into my PhD, and certainly not out of it, with a huge understanding of the business world. And that is a big complaint for a lot of people who are talking about the challenge of transitioning from academic into business, is that there's not a lot of training in those areas. Definitely. And there's not a lot of crossover between an academic training and the business world. So I knew I had to get my hands dirty and kind of learn business on the ground. And that's really what I tried to do after my PhD. I was looking around at my friends and family and networks for somebody that I might be able to kind of learn under their wing. And I did find a family friend in a very unrelated field. He was a hydrologist and civil engineer. And so I went onto one of his projects. It was a residential land project, and kind of took on some of the roles of a business person, in banking and accounting, shareholder engagement, and ATSIC reporting, all of these aspects of the business that weren't directly focused on the challenge of civil engineering, but transferable skills throughout business in general. So to me, that was a stepping stone and a really kind of safe learning experience, where I could then develop my real world business skills with the idea of transitioning back into this science commercialization ecosystem.
Yeah, sounds like it. So fast forward to today, you're the founder of Eon Labs. What do you sort of do on a day-to-day, and what sort of things are you guys doing over at Eon Labs?
Yeah, so I guess there's two projects running concurrently, Eon Labs and Upwood Manufacturing. So Eon Labs is in a stage where we're building our brand and our network. So we're actually running our own podcast series, Lab Notes, where we're going out and interviewing scientists and entrepreneurs making this journey. We've just partnered with Sydney Angels, and we're doing some due diligence on some early stage technology startups around the sustainability space in that. So to take a step back, Eon Labs is all around this kind of science commercialization process. Its long-term goal is to fund a physics and operate a physical lab space that does science commercialization in the model of like an MIT Media Labs, or if you want to go to more the commercial end, something like a Xerox PARC, Bell Labs. These are kind of the highly cited and highly successful examples of these commercial R&D facilities. But to get there, we obviously have to build our brand, our reputation, and start supporting pilot projects and that kind of stuff. So we're funding a few early stage innovators in basically an angel investment capacity, and then building our networks through the podcast series and also an online magazine called Eon Journal. Eventually, we hope to partner with some tertiary institutions and establish a physical lab space to do this kind of fundamental science through to commercialization and business development.
Right. So is Eon Labs and Upwood Manufacturing, are they two different entities or are they sort of under the same umbrella?
They are two different entities. So Upwood Manufacturing was something I founded with several other people that came out of not necessarily IPRI and ACES, but the Innovation Campus more broadly. So it included a guy from ISEM, a kind of partner institute within the AIM building. There's a lot of acronyms around that facility. But yeah, so Upwood Manufacturing begun as a 3D printing education space and a retail store. So we set up in Corrimal, which is just down the road from Wollongong, and we're kind of welcoming the public to teach them about 3D printing and to do custom 3D printing for people. As time went on, it became clear that there were kind of two avenues where that worked from a business perspective. One was in the education side around schools, so both students in school holidays and then teachers through professional development workshops. So we did both of those kind of training aspects. And the second is prototype design, but generally for higher value clients, which is to say businesses prototyping new products. Just the time and effort that goes into creating a new custom item, it was rarely worth it from a retail trade perspective. So that business has definitely pivoted towards servicing those business clients. Right now, it's involved in the COVID response, like many other making facilities. We're working on visors and PPE and these kind of things that are in desperate need for the medical staff that are confronting this virus.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask about that. How is that going?
Yeah, great. Look, I'm staring at a prototype visor right now that we're pretty comfortable with having in the hands of GPs and doctors around. So it's been an exciting time, a very quick time. It's been a few weeks since this whole thing has blown up, and everyone's been scrambling to get these products and concepts out there and to continue refining. But it's great to be able to make a positive contribution. I think a lot of people are feeling a bit helpless with the situation. We're all being told to shelter at home, and a lot of the times that means you don't have any way you can make a difference. So I'm very glad to just happen to have this mini 3D printing lab downstairs and be able to do some hopefully productive things that'll help our frontline health workers.
Yeah, sure. And do you stay in touch with people from IPRI and maybe some of the people working over at Tricep doing 3D printing over there?
Yeah, to some extent, we're definitely in touch. I mentioned briefly one of my PhD supervisors, Mark in Heppanus, is actually continuing to be a really close mentor and friend of mine. So I've been working with him kind of every week or two. We have a meeting and talk about his projects, and he talks about my projects. He's on the board of Eon Labs. So he's helped create that structure and that system, and it is a constant source of advice and encouragement. And likewise, I've been trying to advise him on science commercialization projects that he's got on the boil. So a very beneficial and mutual relationship that's kind of continued the whole way through my degree, actually, because I started with Mark in second year on a research project around carbon nanotube Bucky papers, and we've been working together, I guess, for the best part of a decade now.
Wow. Great. So Eon Labs, you said, was sort of founded in 2018, a few years on now, and you did mention sort of some future plans, but where would you like to see Eon Labs in, say 5 years' time? What's the sort of long-term outlook?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess we're taking on those pilot projects now, and the point of that is to build a base and an example to show that we are able to support science commercialization as a process, and then take that to governments, to grant agencies, to tertiary institutions, and say, hey, look, we've got this track record now. Let's set up a facility that actually does this science translation. I would love to have a space within a tertiary institution where we've got a lab. We take on researchers, PhD students, masters, undergrads, but all of us are working towards commercial outcomes and towards translatable research as much as we are towards publications and the kind of traditional grant schemes. So that's really the hope and the dream, is to have a physical lab space that's developing real world products.
Great. And, you mentioned the podcast earlier. I know Gordon's been on there. Who are some other guests you've had on?
Yeah, so I guess the ACES crew might be familiar with Chris Gilby, who's now running Imagine Intelligent Materials in graphene.
Yes.
The other episodes we've had, the most recent one we just released is with Michael Sharp, who's the National Director of the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Center. We've had science communicators on there. I've just finished recording an interview with Alan Jones, who is a tech investor and angel in Sydney. We've got hopefully a few guests coming up to talk about COVID and vaccine development and that kind of stuff in the coming weeks. So it's tapping into a lot of different people basically across this ecosystem of research commercialization. So everyone from fundamental researchers and entrepreneurs through to venture capitalists, angel investors, university admin people, anyone that someone is likely to meet as they go from having a kind of research idea through to having a developed company. It's kind of trying to explore that space and provide some role models and advice for anyone who's trying to follow that journey.
Great stuff. I listened to the episode with Gordon Wallace. It was great. So keep up the good work on that. Where can people find the podcast? Are you on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, that type of thing?
Yeah, we're basically on all the platforms now. If you go on social media and search for Eon Labs, you'll find us and links to it. Otherwise, we're hosted on Podbean. So you go to Podbean and search for Lab Notes, which is the name of the podcast. Or you can find me on Facebook or LinkedIn at Leo Stevens, and then there'll be links there as well. So basically all roads lead to Rome. If you know how to use Google, I'm sure you'll find us.
Definitely. So earlier on, we were just talking about outside of work. Is there anything else other than your lifeguard? Is there anything else you like to do? Spend your time, sort of take your mind off work and in your downtime?
Yeah, look, I mean, we've got a dog. I love walking him and spending time on the beach. I guess I'm one of those people that does take on projects to fill most of the spare time I have. So I get genuine enjoyment out of the work that I'm doing and the interesting projects we're taking on. So it doesn't necessarily feel like I need a break a lot of the time. I guess one thing that we do is travel, and I really do enjoy the time that we get to spend a week or two traveling. My wife and I did a road trip across the US about 18 months ago, where we landed in San Francisco and drove to North Carolina. So that was an incredible experience of seeing kind of the breadth of that continent. And I'd be very keen to do something like that again when schedules allow.
Great. And something I've asked every guest I've had on the podcast, and I'm interested to hear what you would say on this, is do you have maybe a morning routine or something you do to approach your day of work that helps you be productive?
Yeah, well, I guess mostly my day would start with a walk of the dog, and that, I guess, is a nice way to clear the head. I'll often actually have a podcast in as I'm doing that, so I'll download something during the morning and whack that in my earbuds as I'm walking the dog, sit down with a nice coffee, and then go through my emails and my schedule, my calendar, make sure that I'm aware of what's happening that day, and then basically plug into work from there. So I guess just having that time to clear your head and then looking at what's coming up and getting stuck in.
Great. And what are some podcasts you're currently listening to?
So Planet Money by NPR is a nice one. Right now there's the COVID cast by Dr. Norman Swan, which has been very good at kind of providing the right information among all the misinformation that's out there. I think NPR actually does a great job of releasing a whole heap of different podcasts. There's Shortwave as well, which is a science-based podcast that they do. And then there was another one which kind of put me onto Alan Jones as a guest, is the Failure Proof podcast. That's a guy who's been interviewing various entrepreneurs around Sydney and is particularly interested in the kind of mental health of founders and of the startup journey's impact on founders. So that's a really interesting take on this whole ecosystem as well. So yeah, I'd recommend those three.
Great, I'll have to check them out. Now, just to finish up, is there any advice you'd give to someone, that is sort of thinking about, who's, maybe nearing the end of their PhD and is sort of thinking about going into industry or thinking about, startup life?
Be the dumbest person in the room is a great piece of advice. Find others who have gone through that journey, who are currently in that journey, and tag along with them. You'll learn so much from those mentoring roles that it's so much faster than trying to learn the hard way. So that's a really key piece of advice is absolutely look for those mentor roles, and learn from others and learn on the job. I think if somebody wanted to be an entrepreneur, I think one of the best things they could do out of uni is join someone else's startup for 5 years. You can tag along with their journey. You can still get a salary. You can see and feel and understand what a startup is like, and then know whether it's right for you without having to jump into it immediately. So joining a startup and finding mentors is I think a really valuable approach.
Some great advice there. All right, well, thanks so much for joining the podcast. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. And all the best with Eon Labs and future plans.
Thanks, Sam. Nice to chat.
Thanks for listening to the ACES podcast and my chat with Dr. Leo Stevens. To listen to more episodes like this one, be sure to subscribe wherever it is you listen to your podcasts. You can also find more information about ACES on our website, electromaterials.edu.au. On our website, you'll find links to the various social media platforms we're on. And you can also follow me on Twitter @SamuelFindlay. Until next time, thanks for listening.